He was auctioned off while still bleeding from birth, but one rancher bought him just to give him a bed and let him sleep. Texas Territory, late summer, 1879. The sun bore down on the town of Calico Ridge like the unblinking eye of something cruel. Dust rose from the trampling boots of cattlemen, drifters, and scavengers, all pressing into the narrow main street. Wagons creaked, horses stamped and snorted, and the mingled smell of sweat, leather, and sun-baked earth hung heavy in the air. At the edge of town, where the street widened into a crude pen marked off by rope, a crowd gathered around the rough wooden platform of an auction block. On it stood a woman, young but gaunt, her dress clinging to her with dust and sweat. In her arms, swaddled in a dirty scrap of cloth, was a newborn, red-faced, barely breathing, and still streaked with the stains of birth. The auctioneer's voice was coarse, cracking with the heat and his own excitement. "Startin' at 50 cents. Healthy boy, strong lungs if he makes it through the day. Any takers? 50 cents. That's less than a sack o' feed." The crowd murmured, some laughing, others shaking their heads. Men leaned on the railings, chewing tobacco, spitting into the dirt. Women clutched their bonnets tighter, whispering. A baby, barely alive, sold like a calf. It was a sight to turn the stomach, but in Calico Ridge, no one looked away for long. 40 cents then. 30. Hell, you can't raise a dog for that. The auctioneer wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. 20 cents. Who's got 20? From the back of the crowd, a figure dismounted a tall bay horse, a broad-shouldered man in trail-worn boots, dust on his hat brim, his shirt sticking to his back. His name was Ethan McGraw, a rancher whose land lay 20 miles out, near the dry hills where even mesquite struggled to grow. He stepped forward, his face unreadable under the shadow of his hat. "I'll take him," he said simply, his voice cutting clean through the heat and the noise. The crowd turned, surprised. Ethan didn't look like a man desperate for labor, and certainly not for a dying infant. But he pulled a coin from his pocket, tossed it up to the platform, and nodded. "Give me the boy." The mother, pale, feverish, eyes wild, didn't speak. She just clutched the child tighter, trembling. The auctioneer yanked the cloth bundle from her arms without ceremony, thrusting it toward Ethan as if the baby were no more than livestock. The infant gave a weak cry, a thin wail swallowed by the restless murmurs of the crowd. Ethan took the child gently, cradling him in one large, calloused hand as though he were something breakable. Without another word, he turned on his heel, mounted his horse one-handed, and rode out of town. The sun glared white-hot overhead, and the dust swallowed them both. That night, under a roof of weathered timber and stars, the child lay swaddled in clean cloth on a bed softer than he had ever known. Ethan sat beside him, the flame of a single lantern throwing long shadows against the cabin walls. He'd seen hardship in his life, but nothing like this, a boy born only to be sold before he'd even drawn a full breath. "You'll sleep here tonight," Ethan murmured, his voice low and steady, as though speaking to a colt fresh from the womb. "No man's gonna bid on you again." Outside, the coyotes called to the moon. Inside, the baby slept, his fragile chest rising and falling, while Ethan McGraw kept watch, a lone rancher with no kin of his own, now bound by a choice he hadn't planned to make. The wind howled through the bare branches as dawn broke cold and gray. Inside the small sod house, Sarah awoke to the faint sound of footsteps on the packed earth floor. She pushed herself up from her straw-filled mattress and saw Mary already dressed, her dark hair pinned back, her shawl clutched tightly around her thin shoulders. "You're up early," Sarah murmured, her voice still rough with sleep. "I heard the cows lowing," Mary said softly. "Thought I'd check the barn before the frost settles too heavy." Sarah gave a small smile. "You're becoming more like your father every day." She reached for her boots and winced as she slid them on, the leather stiff from the cold. Outside, the morning was harsh and brittle. A crust of ice crackled underfoot as the two women crossed the yard. Their breath billowed white in the sharp air, and the scent of wood smoke lingered on the breeze. In the barn, the cows shifted restlessly, their warm breath fogging in the dim light. "Looks like we'll need to bring in more hay today," Sarah noted. She glanced at Mary, whose gaze lingered on the road leading into town. "Still thinking about yesterday?" Mary hesitated. "I can't stop wondering who that man was, the one bidding so high for that poor child." Sarah's face tightened. "Not our concern," she said firmly. "The law saw it done, and we can't change it." But inside, the memory gnawed at her too, the pale infant swaddled in a blanket, the sound of the auctioneer's hammer, the stranger's cold eyes as he paid in gold. After chores, Sarah lit the stove and set out cornmeal to make porridge. Mary sat by the window, staring out at the frost-hazed fields. "Do you ever think," Mary asked quietly, "that some folks are just born into sorrow?" Sarah looked up sharply. "Don't talk like that." "I mean it," Mary pressed. "That baby never had a chance. Sold like cattle." Sarah's voice softened, though her jaw stayed tight. "The world's hard, Mary. But we do what we can with the little we're given. Your father used to say hope is just work dressed up in Sunday clothes." Mary smiled faintly at that old saying, but the smile faded as hoofbeats sounded from the road. Both women turned toward the door as a rider approached, a broad-shouldered man on a bay horse, his coat dusted with frost, his hat pulled low. Sarah's heart gave a jolt of recognition. "Stay inside," she told Mary quickly, moving toward the door. But the man was already dismounting. "Morning, Sarah," he called, his voice deep and even. "Morning," she replied warily, stepping out onto the porch. "Didn't expect to see you this far from town, Caleb." Caleb Whitford tipped his hat. "Heard about what happened at the auction. Thought you might want to know. That baby's been taken out to the old Dawson place." Sarah stiffened. The Dawson homestead had been abandoned for years. "Who'd settle out there?" she asked. Caleb's expression was unreadable. "Fella named Granger. Don't know much about him. Doesn't talk to folks." He paused, studying her face. "Just thought you ought to know." Mary had come to stand in the doorway despite Sarah's warning, her eyes wide. "Is the baby all right?" she asked. Caleb gave her a long look, then shrugged. "Hard to say. Place looked cold and empty. Man didn't seem the nursing kind." Sarah swallowed hard, the chill in her bones deepening. "Thank you for telling us," she said quietly. Caleb mounted up again. "Watch yourself, Sarah," he said before riding off down the frozen road. Inside, Mary turned to her mother, fear and anger burning in her gaze. "We can't just leave that baby there." Sarah shut the door against the wind and leaned her forehead against the wood. She felt the weight of her own words from earlier, "The world's hard." But looking at her daughter's face, she knew they couldn't look away forever. The winter sun struggled to rise, casting pale light over the snow-crusted prairie. Nathan awoke before dawn, the old habit of years in the saddle refusing to let him sleep past first light. He stoked the embers in the hearth until the flames licked high, careful not to wake the small form still curled beneath the quilt on the bed. Jenny had slept hard, her tiny fists unclenched at last, her breathing steady and even. Nathan paused for a long moment, watching her. The shadows under her eyes had lessened, though the child's frame was still painfully thin. She was safe here, at least for now. The ranch house was quiet except for the creak of timber against the wind. Nathan brewed coffee, its rich smell filling the room, and set a skillet on to fry bacon. Before long, Jenny stirred, blinking in confusion until memory returned, the man with kind eyes, the soft bed, the promise of warmth. "Good morning," Nathan said softly, offering a smile as she sat up, clutching the quilt around her. She hesitated, then whispered, "Morning." "Hungry?" Jenny nodded, and he placed a plate in front of her, eggs, bacon, and bread still warm from last night's oven. She ate quickly at first, then slowed, watching him from beneath her lashes. "You don't talk much, do you?" Nathan said lightly. Jenny swallowed hard. "Don't need to." "Fair enough." He took a sip of coffee. "But if you ever do, I'll listen." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Later that morning, Nathan saddled his horse. "I need to check the north fence line," he told her. "You'll be all right here?" Jenny looked around the cabin, uncertain. "Alone? Just for a little while. I'll lock the door from the outside, but I'll be back before noon." He crouched to meet her eyes. "No one will hurt you here." She nodded slowly. "Okay." When Nathan returned, the fire was still burning and Jenny was sitting at the table with the same book she had found on the shelf earlier, a battered Bible, pages worn soft from years of use. She couldn't read all the words, but she traced the letters with her finger. "Find anything good in there?" Nathan asked, setting his gloves aside. "Don't know," Jenny said, looking up. "Just letters." He chuckled. "We'll fix that. Everyone deserves to know what the words say." Her gaze lingered on him, wary but curious. No one had ever promised to teach her anything before. By evening, a storm gathered in the west, clouds rolling black across the horizon. Nathan brought in extra wood and checked the shutters. Jenny helped without being asked, carrying kindling in her small arms. As the wind howled and snow began to fall again, Nathan looked down at the child who had appeared so suddenly in his life. He didn't know yet what roads had brought her to this lonely prairie. But he knew one thing with unshakable certainty: she wasn't leaving tonight. And for the first time in years, the ranch house didn't feel so empty. The wind shrieked against the windows all night, rattling the shutters like angry fists. By dawn, the storm had buried the prairie in drifts taller than a man. Nathan had seen hard winters before, but this one had teeth. Jenny woke to the sound of him chopping wood in the lean-to, every swing of the axe muffled by the heavy snow. She padded out of bed, feet cold on the wooden floor, and watched him through the frosted glass until he came back inside, stamping snow from his boot. "Cold enough for you?" he asked with a grin, shaking flakes from his coat. Jenny wrapped herself tighter in the quilt and shrugged. "Not bad." Nathan laughed. "You're tougher than you look." He poured her a cup of warm milk from the stove and set out breakfast, oatmeal sweetened with molasses. Jenny eyed it suspiciously at first, but the first bite won her over. After they ate, Nathan set about teaching her how to read simple words from the Bible. "This one says love," he explained, pointing to the letters. Jenny's brow furrowed as she repeated it, her small finger tracing the word slowly. "Love," she whispered, as though testing its weight. "Exactly." Nathan smiled. "We'll do a few more every day." The hours passed quietly. Nathan mended tack at the table, while Jenny sat cross-legged on the rug, humming to herself as she arranged pieces of kindling into strange shapes. But as the afternoon light dimmed, the peaceful silence was broken by the sound of hoofbeats, faint at first, then louder. Someone was approaching the ranch. Nathan rose quickly, his expression sharpening. Visitors were rare this far out, and storms usually kept men home. He pulled on his coat and stepped outside, leaving Jenny at the door. Two riders appeared through the swirling snow, their horses blowing steam. Nathan recognized them as neighbors from the southern range, brothers named McCreary. Hard men, known more for drinking than kindness. "Mornin'," the taller one called, tipping his hat. "Heard you got company up here." Nathan's jaw tightened. "You heard wrong." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Funny thing. Folks at the trading post said you brought home a little girl. That true?" "Not your concern," Nathan said flatly. "What brings you out in this weather?" The brothers exchanged a glance. "Just checking in. Hard times make folks do desperate things. Wouldn't want to see a kid end up where she don't belong." Nathan's voice went cold. "She's safe here. That's all you need to know." The McCrearys lingered a moment longer, then turned their horses. "You take care now," one of them called over his shoulder, but the tone was more warning than well-wish. When Nathan stepped back inside, Jenny was standing by the table, wide-eyed. "Who were they?" she asked. "Just neighbors," Nathan said, forcing his voice calm. "Nothing to worry about." But long after she'd gone to bed, he sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Word had spread faster than he'd hoped. And in a land where the law rode miles behind trouble, strangers taking an interest in a child could mean danger. Outside, the storm howled on, as though the prairie itself knew a fight was coming. The next morning dawned gray and brittle, the cold sharp enough to sting even inside the cabin. Jenny woke to the sound of Nathan stoking the fire, the smell of fresh coffee and cornbread filling the single room. He smiled when she sat up, hair tangled and eyes still heavy with sleep. Morning, sunshine. Hungry? Jenny nodded, rubbing her eyes. Always. They ate in silence, but Nathan's mind wasn't on breakfast. He hadn't slept much. Every creak of the cabin and whistle of the wind had sounded like hoofbeats in the dark. He couldn't shake the image of the McCreary brothers watching him with that sly look. Men like that didn't ride 10 miles through snow just for neighborly talk. By midday, the storm had eased, leaving a world made new. Snow sparkled under a pale sun, clean and quiet. Nathan decided it was time to check the pasture and see to the stock. Jenny bundled herself in her coat and insisted on coming. "Stay close," Nathan said as they trudged through the drifts. "Snow can hide trouble." They found the horses safe, huddled against the fence, but Nathan noticed something else: fresh tracks leading in from the south. Hoofprints. 2 horses. The same brothers had been by again, watching. Back at the cabin, Nathan latched the door and pulled his rifle from the wall. Jenny watched him carefully. "Are we in danger?" she asked in a small voice. Nathan crouched beside her. "Not if I have anything to say about it." He ruffled her hair, but his eyes stayed hard. "You trust me, right?" Jenny nodded. "I do." That night, the prairie lay still, blanketed in snow, but Nathan kept the lantern burning and the rifle loaded. He sat by the window while Jenny slept under the quilt, her tiny hand curled around the Bible they'd been reading. Near midnight, the silence broke, a faint creak of snow under boots. Nathan rose without a sound and eased the door open just a crack. 2 shadows moved at the edge of the yard. "Thought you could hide her up here, Whitford," a voice called softly through the cold. "But you can't keep her forever. Folks are willing to pay." Nathan stepped fully into the doorway, rifle in hand, the lantern throwing his shadow long across the snow. "You boys best turn around," he said, voice low and even. "Because the next step you take is your last." The men hesitated, muttered something to each other, then faded back into the darkness. Nathan stayed in the doorway long after they'd gone, breath steaming in the freezing air, fingers still tight on the trigger. When he finally closed the door and bolted it, Jenny stirred. "Nathan," she murmured sleepily. "Go back to sleep," he whispered. "You're safe." But as he sat by the fire until dawn, Nathan knew it wasn't over. Out here on the edge of the Dakota Territory, keeping a child safe would take more than a warm cabin and a strong rifle. It would take grit, cunning, and a willingness to face men who didn't fear the law. Outside, the wind had quieted, but Nathan could feel the storm still coming, not in the sky, but on horseback.